Welcome everybody to this first keynote of our conference for the opening keynote for the ISLS annual meeting 2021. It's my pleasure to welcome and honor to welcome my colleague Onur Güntürkün from Ruhr-Universität Bochum. So we were just chatting before, as you people were coming in, we were chatting about the view. So Onur is at the Ruhr-Universität Bochum. It is a local keynote that we would like to take to welcome you. Onur is a professor of biopsychology at Ruhr-Universität Bochum. Actually, he has been a professor there since 1997 and has done a lot of his academic career in Bochum. But you should not get the impression that Onur is just a local guy from Bochum. Onur is in fact very international. He was born in Izmir, Turkey, and did part of his school time also there. But then also during his academic career, he has visited and been guest professor or visiting fellow, visiting scholar at numerous places throughout the world. He also has numerous awards and honors. I will not spend the next 45 minutes talking about his very, very long CV about all the honors, but I would like to highlight, mention a few. This year, and congratulations, Onur, by the way, Onur received the ERC Advanced Grant on the topic of avian mind. Onur is also a member of the two most cited scientists in both the sciences and the social sciences, according to Scopus. He's a member of various academies of sciences, of the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences, of the North Rhine-Westphalian Academy of Sciences, Humanities and Arts, and also of the German National Academy of Sciences. He has won numerous awards, like, for instance, the Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz Award, which is the highest German science award given yearly to 10 scientists from all disciplines in Germany. And he won the Wilhelm Wundt Medal of the German Psychological Society. He was the 11th when he won it in 2006. So between 1956 and 2006, this honor had been given to only 10 scientists, and then he was the 11th in 2006. But Onur, and I could go on here, not only has a lot of awards, he also has an interesting award that I think, Onur, makes you a great keynote speaker for us. In 2014, Onur won the Communicator Award. It's an award that is awarded once a year by the German Research Foundation, the DFG, and the Stifterverband to scientists to recognize exceptional success in communicating research findings to the public. Well, we're not exactly the public, but we are from a very different field. So in addition to the various things that I already mentioned, Onur has won and brought in countless research grants and has initiated many collaborative research initiatives. As we were chatting before the meeting officially started, he and I met as part of a collaborative research center by our National Science Foundation on extinction learning, where he invited me and we talked about our research. And so I think this is a very interesting background also for the keynote talk today. Onur has on his CV almost 400 publications, and that's just counting the journal articles, including articles in Nature and Science. Onur, you're working in the area of behavioral neuroscience and biopsychology, and we are very interested in learning sciences. So this is a conference, this is an annual meeting of the learning sciences, and will be very interesting to hear from you about what are the underpinnings of the research that we do from a very different perspective. We are very honored and very glad to have you. Welcome again, and we look forward to your talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much. So let's start. I said that I'm going to give a talk about how the brain sees learning. And I must say, I'm just a brain guy. So you are the educational scientist, at least most of you. So please be aware that everything I say is from the perspective of a neuroscientist. And so it is up to you if anything of which I'm talking is useful to you, to adapt it to the specific scientific circumstances of the educational sciences. So from that perspective, let's start. Yep, this brain starts working now, though it was on still stand, which I often experience, but now it should work. Sorry for that. So this is the usual starting procedure. Everything goes wrong, but from now on, everything will be smoothly going on. So I would like to start with a voyage through the brain for those of you who may not grasp the dimensions of the brain and of the unit of learning of which I'm going to talk about. The unit of learning is the synapse. So the synapse holds all our memories, and everything we do in an educational context is to alter synaptic weights of the students, for example. So how deep into the brain do we have to go? Let's try. Let's fly into the brain. Let's make a cut here at that point. Look at the section, and we see here the part of the temporal cortex of a human being. And you already see the lamination of the cortex. We come closer here. Now you can see the lamination much better. You can see the granular appearance of the neurons. We come closer at that point. Now we can see the single neurons, so like little blue dots. So it's blue here due to the staining. Otherwise, we call it the gray matter on the left and the white matter on the right. So let's come a little bit more close. We can see that neurons come in different shapes and sizes, but we are still far away from the synapse. We have to move even closer. And now we are here. We can see that there is a lot of empty space between the neurons. And you might think, hey, what's that? There is a lot of space wasted here. There should be much more into it, but it's not. Because if with a specific dye, we can color the whole of one neuron, and we only pick about 5% of the neurons that you can see, but stain them in their full extent, then this is the picture that emerges. So you see each of these neurons has a spectacular dendritic tree that is far larger than the core, the soma of the neuron. So everything there is completely full. There is no wasted space here. Let's go back from this staining and let's move a little bit closer again. And let's concentrate now on this area. We see a very large neuron on the right, and now we should really see everything using a new technique, and this is called electron microscopy. I'm very proud of the next section because I cut it. And I can tell you, electron microscopy isn't easy. So I'm very happy to show you my section. So that's the section of that neuron. And you can see how full everything is. In the middle, you can see the very large neuron, or you mostly see the nucleus of the neuron. But then everything surrounding it are all the incoming and outcoming fibers of all of the different neurons surrounding this big cell. Let's concentrate on this little area on the top, and we can still not completely, at least not nicely, see a synapse. We have to go a bit further close, and now finally we see a synapse. I put on the overlay. The red colored one is the axon of one neuron that makes contact with a dendrite. The dendrite is cut in a way that is along the Z plane of this picture, so it ascends towards you. And you can see this is the unit of learning, and this is the unit of memory. And this unit, the synapse, is changing all the time. And what I'm doing now is just changing your synapses. If you forget everything about my talk, but just remember tomorrow my office, then at least indirectly, I changed your brain by altering your synapses. The blue arrows point to the vesicles where the neurotransmitter is contained that is released into the synaptic cleft. So here we have the unit of learning and memory. So now let's look at some numbers. We have about 81 billion neurons in our brain. These neurons constitute about 1 quadrillion synapses. And in your brain, and I also hope in mine, there are about 10 quadrillion synaptic activations per second. This is an unimaginable number of activities every second of our life. It starts before we are born and it ends a couple of minutes after our death. That means our brain, the human brain, is an organ of unbelievable wealth of contacts and activity levels and an unbelievable number of complex interactions of these neurons. And it's a bit depressing to look at these numbers because I'm one of those who would like to understand what goes on. But I'm pretty sure one day we will. But these numbers and the voyage that you just had will give you an impression of the wealth and the depth of this organ with which we now start to understand how learning and memory might work. So now let's get more simple, much more simple. Here is a picture that goes back to the old days of Donald Tapp, a Canadian psychologist who was the first who came up with a theory how learning could work in the brain. His view is now shown in this very simplified picture with 2 neurons, a neuron called A in red and a neuron called B in green. You can see that the neuron A has a synapse on neuron B. According to Donald Tapp, a memory engram results from an experience and reflects the specific content of this experience. If these 2 neurons are active at the same time, according to Tapp, they can increase the synaptic strength between them. Let's see if that works. We have a large number of action potentials, a high activity level in level A, in neuron A. Neuron B does nothing yet, but then at some point gives in, and indeed, neuron A is rewarded by an increase of its synaptic strength. This has consequences. This is the beginning of memory, because an engram has to go from an activation to a persistent morphological state to last for longer than a few minutes. So this strengthened synapse could, in theory, go on for the rest of the life of this organism, but it also could vanish after a couple of hours. We never know, but in principle, it could hold for the entire lifetime. And it contains memory. Let's look at that. I give you an example for this. Let's assume the flat beneath yours was empty for a long time. And then you see moving boxes coming in and out. Many people run around and they transport stuff. And it seems there is a new person moving into the nearby flat. And you look through the door and you see that guy. He seems to be your new neighbor. He comes close, you see his face, and then he says, and before he says, obviously your visual neuron is highly active and it codes for the details of his face. And then he speaks and says, my name is Mark Müller. Since he speaks, a part of your auditory cortex, and that is also part of the language system, is also activated. So there is a synchronous activity between neurons A and B, and they code for the face and the name of this person. Through this synaptic strengthening, you now have a memory that this face is associated with that name. Let's assume on the next day, you see a person in the supermarket far away from you. It's really a long distance and you don't see him very, very clearly, and there is a lot of clutter in between, but you have the feeling that this is your new neighbor. So since it's very far away, your visual system isn't very active, but it has a strong synapse to the auditory system. And due to that strong synapse, it is able to activate the auditory neuron, and you can retrieve the name Mark Müller. That means a very simple system of synaptic strengthening due to a joint activation, due to a joint experience of these two neurons, establishes memory. This is the beginning of every learning event. A recall of this memory trace reactivates parts of the initial experience. So if you have more than these two neurons, you not only activate the name Mark Müller, but you can activate the whole event, the whole experience, how you looked through the door and Mark Müller approached you, and everything else is then activated in your brain. So the neurons that participate in coding an event are those that are reactivated during memory readout. A memory engram also exists in an inactive state when not being activated. You can see it here. So you can see the dendrite on the top and the dendrite at the level. It's at the bottom. It's the same dendrite, but there are much more thorns on top of that. There are much more synapses, and they code for the new memory. And they are standing still as long as you don't recall it, but they are there when you want to recall them. And Stefan Hell, who received the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2014 from Göttingen, he invented a new method that is called nanoscope, with which he can see the shape of neurons while the animal is actively learning. And this is a small part of the dendrite of a mouse. And I hope I can reactivate the video again. No, I can't. I hope you saw it, that this shape of these little thorns, these postsynaptic entities, were changing all the time due to new learning events of this mouse. So this is the beginning of memory. But memory is constituted by events, as I told you. So we often think that these events are about the content that we were concentrating, but it's not. Just think of this student who's sitting in the library and is working on a certain text. She's concentrating on what she reads, typing it into her laptop. So she will memorize the text, at least we hope so. But she will, and are the neurons that participate in memorizing the text. It's not one, I just drew 4 of them, a small group of them. But there's also the view through the window, and that's also part of the event. That's also part of the group of these neurons. There's a soft hum of the air conditioning, part of the group of neurons. And the feeling that of the fingertips on the keyboard, that's also part of the memory. So what we see is an ensemble that emerges. Events are constituted by ensembles, and ensembles are constituted by much more components than we think they are. And I often say to my students, if you can't recall a certain text, a certain knowledge, try to move back in your episodic memory to the moment where you learned it. Try to remember the desk or the laptop or the view out of the window that you had while reading this. And sometimes this helps to reactivate this ensemble, and then you suddenly realize what you were looking for. So memories of events are constituted by different sensory streams, and therefore they're distributed over the whole brain, because the soft hum of the air conditioning, the feeling of the fingertips, all these are stored in different areas of the brain. As a consequence, they're not only stored in different areas of the brain, but since different areas of the brain have different functionalities and computational properties, these parts of the event are also functionally processed in different ways. So you may experience a single event, but it's constituted by a large number of different components that are distributed and are computed in at least partly different ways within your brain. And you can see this is, for example, just an fMRI image from group results for word reading, a distributed activation over the brain Parts of it are language cortical areas, auditory areas, visual areas. All of these constitute the active regions of the brain while just reading a couple of words. So memories can be accessed during retrieval from different routes with different functional properties. But how are these memories organized in the brain? They are organized in semantic networks, and that's a very nice series of pictures that I'm showing you from a recent paper from the Huth group in the United States, and in which these authors could show that the memory trace of learned events is embedded in different semantic networks of like-minded engrams. So it's not randomly distributed, but semantically related memory items are stored together. And I will tell you in a minute how and why they are stored together in semantically related networks. We can now make the whole cortex flat, and we can see in the different colors given by the group in this paper that these different areas are coding semantically different content. And if we learn a new information, we learn it faster when we already have knowledge, a schema about what we learn. And if it is completely unknown information that does not fit into any schema, then it may take longer, or our brain may twist the information until it conforms with a certain schema that we already have. Here is a small spotlight on a small area, and you can see the memorization of different information. So this is friends, dinner, brother, pregnant, home, house, refused, wives, family, wives, sister, husband, mother, all of semantic networks that are related to each other at the semantic level are housed together in common networks and are distinguishable from other networks that have different commonalities at the semantic level. So who's organizing this? And now this becomes very important for the second half of my talk. This is mostly done by one part of the cortex that we call the medial prefrontal cortex, shown here in blue on the right side. So what the medial prefrontal cortex seems to do is it is second to the hippocampus in organizing the location of memories within the cortex. It's like an index table of what is where. But when it is organizing this index table, it organizes the information according to an abstract knowledge, according to concepts, schemata, task rules, so content-wise location. So the medial prefrontal cortex is a key area to understand the semantic landscape of our cortex. And this will be very important now in a couple of minutes, because then we will see how this area really twists our memories to conform to the different concepts and schema. And this will be relevant when we talk of retrieval. So usually, at least in my experience, teachers, if we take them as a classic group of educational, of people working within the educational system, they take care of the learning event. So when you've learned it, they're happy, and then they leave you in peace. At least that was how I experienced my school time. And we have quite often a naive view of what learning and saving information is. According to this view, we save the content of this book on a memory store, here a hard disk, and then we can retrieve the information as often as we want. And we can go on retrieving it, and the retrieval does not alter the content of the memory store. Nothing could be as wrong as that. Retrieval alters the memory store drastically. Every time we remember something, we forget what we remembered and create this memory anew, often in a slightly different way. This was something that neuroscientists had discovered about 40 years ago, but then forgot because these papers were never taken seriously until in 2000. And meanwhile, classic paper redid the old studies in a much better way, and now this has become a huge research field. Let's go to this paper and let's look what Nader and colleagues did here in the year 2000. So they made a very simple-minded experiment. They conditioned a rat. It's a fear conditioning task. There is a sound, and this sound is followed by an electric shock, and that obviously results in a classical conditioning. As a result, as soon as the sound appears a second time, the rat remembers it, and the rat is expecting a shock, and it's anticipating the pain, and it's full of fear and freezes of fear. So, and then you can have a readout of the amount of freezing as a readout of the recalling of the classical conditioning, the association between sound and electric shock. That much is classic textbook. Now, you give one group of rats a drug that prevents new learning. To be more clear about that, it prevents protein synthesis. Protein synthesis is required for new learning because, oh, that's my telephone, but you don't care about it. Should I go and hang up? What do you think? I think I do. Just a second. You know, this is exactly 22 minutes into my talk. And my secretary always knows about 20 to 25 minutes after the beginning of my talk, she has to call me up because then we create something different. And then everybody who fell asleep is now fully awake again and can listen to me. I hope this effect worked on your case, in your case. Okay, let's talk of the second group. The rats received a drug that prevents new learning. So, and this, what this drug is doing is blocks protein synthesis, which is required for new learning to occur. So the rat is calm, since no sound means no shock, so there is no sound appearing. 24 hours later, when it hears the sound, it freezes of fear. So the drug given in that moment had no effect at all on the memory of that is tested 24 hours later. So no effect of the drug delivery. However, when you give the animal the drug and give the sound, so the animal retrieves the memory. It retrieves it well. There is no problem at all with the retrieving it. The rat freezes. However, tested 24 hours later, it has forgotten everything. So retrieving a memory under the condition of having blocked the possibility for the acquisition of new memory erased the trace. That means the trace is always constructed anew, or at least partly anew, in the moment you retrieve it. Retrieval means reactivating the trace and creating a trace that is not stable, but unstable. And if nothing happens, it's stabilized again, but at the same time, incorporating new information from the moment of retrieval. That means memories are safe as long as you don't remember them. If you remember one day in your childhood, please don't remember it. Otherwise you erase it. And you make it possibly richer with information from today. But that, of course, alters your memory. The pureness of your memories are only safe as long as you don't remember them, because there is no retrieval, no recall without erasing the old memory and partly changing it with new information. And this was obviously something that educational scientists tested. And now I'm within the 5 minutes, that I'm truly anxious about, because Nicole and many of you will know these papers by heart, but I need them to make my final arguments of my talk. This is a paper of Karpike and Rödiger, published in Science 2008. It's a very simple-minded, but very strong and powerful experiment in my point of view. So their students had to learn 40 pairs of 40 Swahili English words. So you can see them. So in Swahili, atama means honor, adui means enemy, etc., etc. So the students had to learn these 40 pairs. But each group of students had to learn them in a slightly different way. So the first group had to study and test. So they always received one word pair, had to study them, and then they were tested. And irrespective if they remembered the paired word correctly or not, the next time they all again had to study it and again were tested. And they did this 8 times. The second group, when they remembered a word, they did not have to study it anymore, so study no, but they were tested. So no, they always went through all tests, but they didn't have to study again. The third group had to do the same, but in their case, they had to go on studying in 8 cycles, but they were not tested anymore. And in the fourth group, when they knew a word, when they had remembered a pair correctly, this pair was taken away. They didn't have to study it anymore, and they were not tested anymore. So the difference is the first group study and test 8 times. The second group, no study time when you remembered it, but you are tested 8 times. In the third group, it's just the other way around. You have to study it, but you're not tested when you knew the pair. And in the fourth, you don't have to study and you are not tested when you know a pair. So what is the result? 1 week later, tested. The students who had to do a lot of testing were excellent in their memory, but the students who had to test less, but were strong in studying, had a very bad memory. Interestingly, the metacognitive part of the students was quite different. They had the feeling that studying strengthened their memory, not testing. And if you test the students directly after these 8 cycles, all 4 groups were about at similar levels. That means testing boosts memory, retrieval boosts memory. When I say testing, this is just one way of retrieval. You can test in any way you want, but the main point is retrieval. That's, I would say, a very strong and interesting effect. But why does it happen? Why? Neuroscientists were very interested in that. And meanwhile, there is quite a lot of studies on the neuroscientific reasoning for this. First of all, what these colleagues discovered is, and you can see this in this red arrow, retrieval shifts the engram from the sensory areas to the medial prefrontal cortex. That means they are no longer left within the sensory space. They are embedded now in the semantic network. This result is a semanticization of the memory. So I told you, there is no shift of memory without also a shift of processing. So a shift from a sensory area to the prefrontal area means that you move from a sensory representation to a semantic representation. Retrieval also strengthens the engram of the specific item. So this item as such is strengthened, but at the same time, it is embedded in categories and within a proper network. So you do both. You strengthen the individual information item, but embedded in a contextual framework. And retrieval also activates parts of the lateral prefrontal cortex. And what this area is doing is suppressing wrong but competing memories. So what retrieval is doing is making much more salient representations of information, at the same time embedding it into a semantic network and suppressing competing and wrong theories, wrong memories. So that's the strength of retrieval. And this is why retrieval is able to boost memory so much. But there is a dark side to it. And this is the last thing I would like to talk with you about. And I wrote here on the title, Memories Contain the Past, but they are not about the past. They are about the future, about all of your tomorrows. So what I mean with that is the following. What we do, we constantly alter our past by remembering the past. Altering our past by remembering our past changes, obviously, our today's expectations, and that's evolutionary useful. But at the same time, it destroys, well, destruction is a wrong word. It alters the way we think we have lived. And there's a nice example of that. Jean Piaget has a single, extremely vivid memory of his early childhood. He was raised in a rich family, and as a rich family, he had a person, a young woman, who was taking care of him during the day when his parents were not there or doing other stuff. And this young woman was taking care of him very nicely. She took him to strolls and walks to a nearby park every day. Whatever the weather, she was always there, and he had to run around and play in the park. One day, he remembers a man approached them, and he suddenly took small Jean and tried to rip him away from this young woman. She fought like a lioness, and her clothes were partly ripped off. She got fist strokes and everything. And also Jean was running, trying to run away, but he was catched by the man again. And also he was really bruised. But then a policeman finally saw the scene, came running, and this man ran away, and he never was caught. So they both came home and told the story to their parents. And it was an unbelievable story. Parents were very proud of this young woman, praised her, gave her an increase of her salary. And that was the most vivid memory of Jean. Decades later, the family of Jean Piaget received a letter from this woman, who meanwhile was not a young woman anymore. And she wrote that she is sick, she might die, and she don't want to die with the sin of the lie. She said, this man who tried to rip away Jean never existed. The reality is I had a lover in the park, and I wanted to meet him every day. And little Jean was so nice. He was always playing calmly in a certain spot, so I could go behind the bush with my friend and we could love each other. And one day, Jean fell down and he had hurt himself badly. And I suddenly realized that I need an excuse. So I came up with this idea. I told this idea, Jean, repeatedly and repeatedly until he could recall every word. And then we moved home, we went home and told the story. Jean Piaget was not shocked because he suddenly realized that a part of his biography was wrong. No, he was shocked because he realized that this was possibly just one example out of many, where what he thought his life was possibly just a construction. But how is that possible? Now we can explain this with everything I told you very easily. And now for this, I just give you an example, a fictive example of two friends, Wolfgang and Manfred. They studied at the Ruhr-Universität in Bochum. Where else? Of course. Wolfgang studied psychology and Manfred studied electric engineering sciences. They were living in the same dorm and they had a great time. And quite often in the evening, they met and went out also for sport and many things more. But then after finishing their studies, they got jobs in different places and somehow lost contact. Manfred moved into the IT industry and Wolfgang became a psychologist, was interested in cognitive sciences and developed a new mnemonic method with which people can remember their PIN codes much better than without this method. And this caught some interest in the IT industry. So they invited him to give a talk. So he was there at a conference, he knew nobody there. But then suddenly, in the coffee break, that's exactly the moment where Wolfgang and Manfred met each other after decades. They were very happy. They both lied to each other, telling the other one that they did not change a bit, which obviously both knew that it wasn't true. And they had a great time. And then they exchanged telephone numbers and email, etc. And then they had contact. And from now on, met regularly for a beer, a dinner, or whatever. And one of these occasions, Manfred said, well, you know, that I met you at this conference is crazy enough. But I think most crazy is that this is the network, the ensemble in Wolfgang's brain before he met Manfred. And that's exactly the network within the ensemble that is activated after meeting Manfred. So this ensemble codes for the specific properties of this meeting, the visual aspects of it, the auditory aspects of it, what he felt, all of that is part of this ensemble of this meeting. But let's go on now to the evening where Manfred is recalling the meeting event. And Manfred says, well, it's crazy enough that we met at this conference, but most crazy, I think, is that we also met Ute, you know, from the second floor. So Ute, who was studying literature sciences, you remember Ute? And Wolfgang said, no, Ute wasn't there, I'm pretty sure. And Manfred said, no, she was there. You know, she was there. I remember very vividly. She was at the same coffee break and we met, the three of us. And Wolfgang said, but you know, Manfred, I'm pretty sure you're wrong because Ute left Germany after studying literature sciences. I'm not really sure where she went to, but she never really came back. She wasn't there. I'm pretty sure about that. Now we see the ensemble again. Wolfgang is pretty sure that they never met Ute. But then the next day, during breakfast, he ruminates around. And in that moment, he isn't very sure. He is completely sure anymore. Because somehow he thinks there is a little bit of memory of Ute there. Here is some neurons that code for Ute. And now we learned from Donald Tapp that when neurons are synchronously active, they connect with strong synaptic ties. And that's exactly happening. Ute is recalled while at the same time, all the details of the meeting with Manfred during the coffee break are recalled. And over time, this synaptic connections are getting stronger and stronger. That means our possibility to change the past, to adapt it to the new circumstances, also has a dark side. It implies that our memories are not virgin. They're changing all the time, and we change them all the time. You may remember the Swiss novelist Max Frisch. In his book Gantenbein, he said, everyone sooner or later invents a story that they believe to be their life. And I think Max Frisch was right, because what neuroscience is telling us about the whole conundrum of learning, memory, and retrieval is exactly this. We sharpen our memory every day by learning new events, and so by altering our memory on a daily basis. But at the same time, this creates a construction of the past that feels very natural and that feels like our life. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Onur. Let's give you a round of